He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I can't keep lying to myself. Your sister is the one I really want." So I looked right back and told him to go have her, never once telling him I was carrying his baby. He didn't even flinch when he said it. We were standing in the kitchen of the house we'd bought together on Larkspur Lane, the one with the crooked mailbox he kept promising to fix. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were trash night, and the bin was still sitting by the door waiting for one of us to drag it to the curb. "I can't keep lying to myself," Owen said. "Your sister is the one I really want." The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a dog barked twice and went quiet. I stood there with a dish towel in my hand, and I understood, in the space of about 4 seconds, that 7 years of my life had just been filed under a mistake. "Then have her," I said. He blinked. I watched it happen, that small, confused flicker, like he'd rehearsed a version of this conversation where I cried, where I grabbed his arm, where I asked him what I did wrong. He'd built himself a script, and I wasn't reading my lines. "Reagan," he said, like my name was supposed to soften something. "Go," I said. "Have her." He left 40 minutes later with a duffel bag and his charger cord trailing out of the zipper like a loose nerve. I didn't cry until I heard his car pull out of the driveway, and even then it wasn't the kind of crying you do for a person. It was the kind you do for a version of your life you'd already buried without knowing it. I didn't tell him I was 11 weeks pregnant. I didn't tell him that morning, and I didn't tell him the next morning, when he came back smelling like her perfume, a rose and something metallic, with a faint smear of her lipstick still on the collar of his shirt, like he hadn't even bothered to check a mirror. I said nothing. I let him think he'd left clean. He had no idea what he was actually walking away from, and for a long time, neither did I. Not really. Not until 18 months later, in a room full of people who loved him more than they'd ever loved me, when a stranger I'd never met opened his mouth and said one sentence that ended Owen's second act before it even finished starting. But that comes later. First, you need to understand how we got to that kitchen. I was 24 when I married Owen Castellano. He was 26, 3 years out of a business degree he hadn't finished paying for, working a mid-level job at a logistics company in Tulsa that he was always about to get promoted out of. I was working 2 jobs, days at a pediatric dental office doing billing, nights waiting tables at a steakhouse off the 44, because his student loans were choking us both, and somebody had to keep the water running. I didn't resent it then. I want to be honest about that. I loved him in the uncomplicated way you love someone before you've had enough evidence to know better. I believed the loans were temporary. I believed the promotion was coming. I believed we were building something together, brick by brick, the two of us against a slow economy and bad luck. My sister Brooke was 22 when Owen and I got married, 3 years younger than me, already halfway to becoming what she'd eventually turn into, a woman with 11,000 Instagram followers and a ring light she called essential equipment. She did our wedding hair for free and told everyone at the reception it was a labor of love. She stood in my dress fitting and told the seamstress the neckline made my shoulders look broad. She was 22 and already fluent in the specific cruelty of saying something awful with a smile stapled to it. My mother, Carol, adored her, always had. Brooke was the pretty one, the fun one, the one who lit up a room, which was my mother's way of saying Brooke got attention and I got chores. I'd made peace with that a long time before Owen ever walked into either of our lives, or I thought I had. There was an incident 4 years into my marriage that I filed away and didn't think about again until much later, when it stopped being a strange memory and became a clue. It was Thanksgiving, the year I turned 28. Owen had had 2 beers and was loose in that particular way. Beer made him loose, funnier, looser-jawed, less careful with his eyes. Brooke came downstairs in a green dress she'd bought for the occasion, and Owen said to the room, not quietly enough, "Damn, Brooke, you clean up nice." Brooke laughed. My mother laughed. I laughed too, because that's what you do at Thanksgiving when your husband says something a little inappropriate about your little sister and everyone's had wine. You laugh because the alternative is being the woman who can't take a joke. But I noticed later that night, doing dishes, that Owen had refilled Brooke's glass 3 times and mine 0. I noticed he'd sat next to her instead of me. I noticed, and then I did what I always did with things I noticed about Owen. I put it in a drawer in my head labeled "Not Now," and I closed it. The drawer got fuller over the years. Small things. The way he remembered Brooke's coffee order, oat milk, 2 pumps of vanilla, but forgot mine after a decade of ordering it for me. The way he just happened to be free whenever Brooke needed help moving apartments. 3 times in 4 years, always available for her, mysteriously slammed with work whenever I needed him to come to a doctor's appointment. The dollar amounts tell part of the story too. I paid off $34,000 of his student loans between our 2nd and 6th year of marriage, working the extra shifts, skipping vacations, driving a Honda Civic with 190,000 miles on it, while he leased a truck he needed for work that he used to haul nothing but his own ego. When my fertility specialist told us IVF would run us close to $19,000 out of pocket, uncovered by insurance, I picked up more shifts at the steakhouse. Owen didn't pick up anything. He said his job was too demanding for a second income stream, though he found time to golf on Saturdays with men from the office and increasingly to text. I found the text by accident in year 6. Not romantic, not yet, but something. A string of messages between him and Brooke about a trip to Cabo she was definitely doing this time, with him writing back, "Wish I could come. You know I'd rather be there with you than stuck here," followed by 3 laughing emojis that didn't feel like a joke to me, even though I told myself it was a joke. I asked him about it. He told me I was being paranoid. He told me Brooke was basically his sister sister too, and that my jealousy was kind of insulting, honestly, to both of us. I remember the specific phrase he used. "You're seeing something that isn't there, Reagan." I remember believing him because believing him was easier than the alternative, and because by then, I'd already invested 6 years, and 6 years is a heavy thing to set down. The IVF started that same year. 3 rounds at the fertility clinic on South Yale Avenue, a place with soft lighting and a fish tank in the waiting room that always struck me as a strange kind of comfort for a room full of women hoping for something the tank's fish would never need to hope for. My body swelled and ached and betrayed me in small daily ways nobody warns you about. The bruising from the injections, blooming yellow-green across my stomach in constellations, I got used to hiding under looser clothes. The mood swings that made me feel like a stranger in my own skull. The 2 rounds that failed and left me sitting in my car in the clinic parking lot both times, unable to drive for 20 minutes because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The 3rd round finally took. I was 31 years old, 11 weeks along, and I hadn't told anyone yet. Not my mother, not Brooke. I wanted to wait until the 12-week mark, the safe mark, before I said the words out loud and made them real to other people. Owen came to exactly one of the 11 appointments that led up to that pregnancy. I stopped keeping count of the ones he missed somewhere around appointment 6, because counting had started to feel like keeping score in a game only I was playing. I never got the chance. Owen told me about Brooke the week before I would have reached 12 weeks. So that's the shape of the marriage that ended in that kitchen on Larkspur Lane. 7 years, 2 jobs mostly carried by me, 1 dead-end business degree I helped him finish paying off, 3 rounds of IVF, a drawer full of small things I'd talked myself out of noticing properly, and a baby he never knew existed, growing quietly inside me while he packed a duffel bag to go be with my sister. I want to tell you the escalation started slow. It didn't. It started fast and then found new gears I didn't know existed. Quick pause from the story. If you enjoy these stories, consider taking a listen to our Spotify show, linked in the description, for early access to new stories in better audio quality. Now back to the video. The first call came from my mother less than 24 hours after Owen left. I hadn't even called her yet. Somehow she already knew. "Owen and Brooke are together now," she said. Not a question. An announcement, delivered in the tone of a woman relaying good news about a job offer. "Isn't that something? I always thought they got along so well." "Mom," I said, "I'm still married to him." "Well, obviously that's ending," she said, like I was the slow one in the conversation. "These things happen, sweetheart. Owen says you two haven't been happy in a long time." Owen says, "Less than a day." And he'd already gotten to her first, already shaped the story before I'd said a word of my own. That was step 1 of the escalation, the narrative arriving before the facts did, so that by the time I opened my mouth, I was already contradicting a version of events everyone had agreed on without me. I told her I needed to go, and I hung up. 3 weeks after that call, I lost the baby. The doctor said stress could be a contributing factor, though she was careful, clinical, the way doctors are when they don't want to hand you a reason to blame yourself on top of everything else. I sat in that office alone. Owen was somewhere with Brooke. I didn't ask where. And I made a decision I've turned over in my mind 100 times since. I decided not to tell anyone, not my mother, not Brooke, not Owen. I didn't want their sympathy, because I knew, even in the worst hour of my life, that their sympathy would come with strings, would come with my mother finding a way to make it about how hard this must be for Owen too, would come with Brooke posting some soft-lit caption about holding space for the people going through hard things, never once specifying who. I grieved that loss completely alone, in an apartment I'd rented with the last of my savings, eating crackers because groceries felt like too much effort, and I told exactly nobody. I still haven't told my mother. Some griefs you carry because sharing them costs more than the silence does. That was the floor. I want you to understand that, because everything after it was building, not falling. I had nowhere left to go but up, and up is exactly where I went, though it took me a long time to see it that way while I was living it. I took a job I would have laughed at 2 years earlier, cleaning crew at a gym called Ilsa's Iron, a low-slung cinder block building on the industrial side of town that smelled permanently of chalk and rubber. I mopped floors, I wiped down equipment, I emptied trash cans full of protein bar wrappers. It paid $11.50 an hour, and it was the only place that would take me on the spot, no notice period, start tomorrow. Ilsa Renner owned the place. She was 61, built like a retired strong woman because that's exactly what she was. 2 decades on the powerlifting circuit before her knees gave out, and she traded the platform for ownership. She watched me my first day, mopping around a rack of dumbbells with my eyes red and swollen from crying in the car before my shift, and she said, "Honey, a barbell fixes more than you think." I didn't believe her, but I had nothing else, so I let her show me. Brooke found out where I was working within the month. My mother told her, of course. My mother, who'd apparently appointed herself communications director for everyone's business but mine. Brooke showed up one Saturday with Owen, ostensibly to sign up for a membership, though I understood exactly what it was. It was a visit. It was them wanting to see me small. I was on my knees scrubbing a water fountain when they came in. Brooke was in workout clothes that cost more than my rent, her hair in the kind of effortless-looking bun that takes 40 minutes to get effortless-looking. She watched me for a second, then said, loud enough for the front desk to hear, "Stairs must be hard for some people," and held out a napkin like she was doing me a kindness, like sweat on my forehead was a stain she was helping me address. I took the napkin. I said nothing. I finished the fountain and moved to the next thing on my list. That was the pattern for a while. Small cruelties delivered with a smile smile, delivered as if they were favors, delivered in a register that made it impossible to object without looking unhinged. If I'd snapped at her, I'd have been the bitter ex-wife who couldn't handle her sister's happiness, so I didn't snap. I lifted instead. There were other visits after that first one, spaced out but steady, like Brooke needed periodic proof that I hadn't crawled somewhere to disappear. She came in November with Owen trailing behind her carrying 2 protein shakes, and she asked me, in front of a client I was mid-session with, whether I'd found anyone new yet, her tone light and curious, the tone of a woman asking about the weather. I told her I was working. She laughed and said, "Of course you are," in a way that made working sound like a euphemism for something pitiful. She came again in January, alone that time, and stood at the front desk for 10 minutes pretending to consider a membership she had no intention of buying, watching me train a 60-year-old man through a set of assisted squats. When I finished, she said, "Mom says you're not returning her calls. She's worried about you, you know. We both are." I told her I was fine. She looked at me for a long moment, something almost like calculation behind her eyes, and said, "You always did do better under pressure than the rest of us. I guess that's one thing you've got." It wasn't a compliment. It landed like one on the surface, the way all her sentences did, but underneath it was the same old architecture. I was the workhorse. She was the one worth admiring, and my resilience was simply further proof that I existed to absorb things, so people like her didn't have to. I let it go, the way I let all of it go, because the alternative meant becoming the person who made scenes at a gym front desk, and I had already decided, somewhere in those first raw weeks, that I would not give either of them the satisfaction of watching me come apart in public. I saved it instead. I put it in the same drawer where I'd been filing things about Owen for years, and the drawer kept getting heavier, and I kept telling myself I'd deal with its contents someday later, when I had the energy to look at all of it honestly. Ilsa noticed. She always noticed. About 2 months in, she found me after close, alone in the gym, doing a set of deadlifts with a bar I had no business being under, form sloppy, weight too heavy, working out something I couldn't name with my hamstrings and my spine. "You're gonna hurt yourself," she said, and then she taught me how to do it properly. Hip hinge, bar against the shins, chest up. She stood behind me for 20 minutes correcting my form, and something about being corrected by someone who wasn't trying to diminish me, who was trying to make me stronger and safer at the same time, cracked something open in me that had been sealed for years. 6 weeks after that, Ilsa offered to pay for my personal training certification. Full cost, no strings, no interest, nothing. "You're good with the members," she said. "You talk to the sad ones. I've watched you do it. That's not nothing." I studied for that certification on my lunch breaks, on the bus, in the bathtub with waterproof flashcards Ilsa found for me at a supply store, like it was the most normal purchase in the world. 8 months after Owen left, I had my license. A year after that, I had real clients, not Ilsa's regulars, but my own. Women I'd built relationships with one session at a time. Women who told their friends, and eventually their husbands, about the trainer who'd rebuilt herself from the floor up along with their bodies. One of those women was Paulette Ferris. She was 54, married to a man named Desmond who owned 11 commercial properties across the metro, and she'd come to me 2 years post-divorce herself, angry and soft in ways she didn't like admitting to. Over 8 months of training sessions, she told me her story and I told her mine, in pieces, the way you do with someone you're starting to trust. "You should have your own place," she told me one Tuesday, toweling off after a set of lunges. "You're wasted cleaning Ilsa's floors and training on the side." I laughed it off. I had $2,300 in a savings account and a car with a check engine light that had been on for 4 months. "Sure, Paulette, any day now." She wasn't joking. 3 weeks later, she called me and said Desmond had an empty commercial unit on the east side, previously a defunct furniture outlet, 4,200 square feet, sitting vacant and costing him in taxes and upkeep either way. "He'll rent it to you for $1 a month for the first year," she said. I told him what you're building. He trusts my read on people. I want to be honest. I cried on that call, the kind of crying that comes from disbelief more than joy, because I still hadn't fully believed anyone was capable of giving me something without wanting something back. I moved my sleeping bag into that empty building before I moved anything else. I slept on the floor of my own gym for 6 weeks while I built it out, because I couldn't afford both an apartment and equipment mattered more. I ate crackers and peanut butter most nights, the same diet I'd eaten during the worst weeks after I lost the baby, except this time it felt like fuel instead of punishment. I worked from 6 in the morning until close at Ilsa's, then drove straight to the old furniture outlet and worked until midnight most nights, tearing out the shelving units the previous tenant had left bolted to the walls, patching drywall with a borrowed sander, learning how to read electrical schematics off a laptop propped on a paint bucket because the contractor Desmond sent over could only spare a few hours a week for a rent-free tenant. I broke a toe in week 3, dropping a section of shelving on my own foot at 11 at night with nobody around to hear me swear. I taped it myself from a first aid manual on my phone and kept working the next morning because I didn't have the money to lose a day of hours at Ilsa's, let alone the time to sit in an urgent care waiting room. My mother called twice during those 6 weeks. Both times she wanted to talk about Brooke's engagement party, whether I planned to attend, what I thought Brooke should register for. I didn't tell her I was sleeping on a gym floor with a broken toe. I didn't tell her much of anything by then. There didn't seem to be a version of the truth she wanted to hear that wasn't really about somebody else. Paulette's friends, women with money and grudges of their own against husbands who'd underestimated them, him. Started asking about investing before I'd even hung the sign. I signed $150,000 in equipment financing backed by 3 of them. Women I'd never trained a single session for. Women who simply liked the story of a woman rebuilding from a gym floor. 2 months into construction, Owen texted me for the first time since he'd left. I still had his number saved, which tells you something about how long I'd been carrying pieces of him around without meaning to. Saw your page, he wrote. Trying to be like Brooke won't win me back. I read it twice. I felt something close to laughter rise up in my chest, not because it was funny, but because it was so profoundly, almost comically wrong. He thought I was performing for an audience of him. He thought every hour I'd spent under a bar, every session I'd built with my own hands out of nothing, was some elaborate bid to make him jealous. I didn't answer. I was signing paperwork with Paulette's investors that same week, $150,000 in equipment orders. My name on every line, my hands only slightly shaking as I wrote it. That was the plant, the detail I want you to remember. Owen believed from the very beginning that everything I did was still somehow about him. He never once considered that I might have simply stopped orbiting him entirely. That misunderstanding of his own importance in my life is the thing that would eventually break him wide open, though neither of us knew it yet. My gym opened on a Saturday in April with 700 members already signed by the ribbon cutting, a number that stunned even Paulette. Within 3 months, we were profitable. $50,000 in the black, real money. Money nobody had handed me. Money I'd built with sweat and other people's belief and a stubbornness I hadn't known I had in me until I had no other choice. I met Grant Okafor 4 months after opening. He came in as a member first, an Olympic lifter who'd competed internationally in his 20s and was now easing into his late 30s coaching part-time and working as a physical therapist. He watched me correct a client's form one evening and said afterward, quietly, "You've got good eyes. You see the whole kinetic chain, not just the one joint that's obviously wrong." It wasn't a pickup line. That's what got me. He wasn't performing charm. He was just noticing something true and saying it plainly. And I'd been so long around people who said things to get something that plain honesty landed on me like weather. We started slow. Coffee after his sessions, then dinner, then 6 months in. He told me he'd been in love with me since the night he watched me talk a sobbing new client through her first unassisted pull-up, patient and steady. No ego in it at all. "I watched you build something out of nothing," he said. "That's not a small thing to fall for." We got engaged 8 months after that first coffee. I was 5 months pregnant by then. This time not by any clinic's help, just by 2 people who wanted the same thing and got lucky, or got what felt like luck after everything else. My parents called constantly during those months, my mother especially, pressing me to attend Owen and Brooke's 1-year wedding anniversary, an event I had zero interest in and every intention of declining until my father called and said something that changed my mind. "Owen says he has something important to tell the family," my father said. "Your mother thinks it might be good news. Come, Reagan, for the family, if not for him." I didn't know what the announcement was. I assumed a pregnancy, which, given what I'd later learn, was almost right and entirely wrong at the same time. I decided to go. Not out of curiosity about Owen, out of something closer to readiness. I was 33 years old, engaged to a man who treated me like a person and not a mirror. 5 months into a pregnancy that felt like joy instead of clinical machinery, and running a business worth more than Owen would make in a decade at his logistics job. I wanted them to see all of it at once. I'm not going to pretend that wasn't part of it. Grant walked in beside me the night of the anniversary party, tall and calm in a navy suit, his hand resting lightly at the small of my back the way it always did. Not possessive, just present. I was 5 months along, showing clearly, wearing a dress I'd chosen specifically because it made that unmistakable. Owen's face, when he saw us in the doorway, was the single best thing I had witnessed in over a year. His eyes went from my belly to Grant's shoulders and back to my belly again, and I watched his brain physically struggle to process information that didn't fit the story he'd apparently kept telling himself. The story where I was still circling him at a distance, waiting, performing my new life for an audience of one. Brooke was pregnant too, seated near the head table in a champagne-colored gown that did nothing to hide how uncomfortable she looked. She didn't look glowing. She looked like a woman holding her breath. I noticed it and filed it away. The same drawer, a different kind of note this time. She caught my arm in the hallway outside the restroom, 10 minutes before the toasts began, her manicured nails pressing hard enough into my skin to leave 4 small marks I'd notice later in the car. "Please," she whispered. Her eyes were wet, mascara already starting to migrate. "He knows something. You have to help me." "Help you with what?" I asked her, genuinely confused, though some old instinct in me was already bracing. She didn't answer. Someone called her name from the ballroom, and she let go of my arm and walked back in like nothing had happened, smoothing her dress, arranging her face into the practiced brightness she'd been performing since she was 12 years old. I should tell you here, plainly, what I didn't fully understand until later that night, the piece that recontextualized everything. Owen had gone in for a routine physical 8 months earlier, required by his employer's new health plan, and the results had included something he never mentioned to anyone in the family, a fertility panel showing extremely low sperm motility, a condition his doctor told him, according to records that would surface later in a very different context, had likely been present his entire adult life due to a childhood case of untreated mumps. Owen had known, or at minimum strongly suspected, that he could not father a child for 8 months before that anniversary party. He had said nothing to Brooke. He had let her celebrate a pregnancy he had reason to believe wasn't biologically possible possible for him to have caused, and he had let that suspicion sit in him, curdling, until the exact night he chose to detonate it in front of every person either of them loved. I didn't know the medical specifics yet in that hallway. I only knew Brooke was frightened, and that Owen tapping his glass with a fork 30 seconds later was not, whatever my mother believed, going to be good news. The whole room turned toward him. My mother leaned forward, smiling, already anticipating grandchild news she could brag about at church. "Everyone," Owen said, and his voice was shaking in a way I'd never heard from him, not even the day he left me. "I have an announcement." Brooke went pale as chalk beside him. "The baby Brooke is carrying isn't mine," Owen said, staring directly at her, not at the room, at her. "I'm infertile. I've always been infertile." The room went dead silent in a way I'd only ever read about in books, the kind of silence that has texture, that presses against your ears. Somebody's fork hit a plate. My mother's hand flew up to cover her mouth. My father stared down at his food like it might, if he looked hard enough, explain what he'd just heard. Then Owen turned, away from Brooke, toward me. "Leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life," he said, loud enough for the entire ballroom, his voice cracking on the word mistake. "I'm not letting you go again." He started walking toward me, across a room full of his own family and hers, past the head table, past the string quartet that had gone quiet mid-song, and I stepped back on pure animal instinct, my hand going to my belly the way pregnant women's hands do without any conscious decision behind them at all. Grant moved half a step in front of me. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise a hand. He simply stood there, solid and unmoving, a wall built out of calm, and that stillness did more to stop Owen than shouting ever could have. And that's when Owen finally saw my stomach clearly, up close, for the first time all evening. I watched his face change in real time, confusion first, then something darker moved underneath it, something I had genuinely never seen on him before in 7 years of marriage, something close to fear, the specific fear of a man doing fast, panicked math and not liking any of the answers. He reached his hand toward me anyway, like he still believed he had some claim on my body, my life, my future, opening his mouth to say something else, something about starting over, about second chances, about the two of us against the world the way we used to be before the world got interesting somewhere else. Behind him, Brooke had backed into the bar area, screaming, actually screaming, a sound I'd never once heard from my composed, camera-ready sister, at a man near the ice sculpture I didn't recognize. He was maybe 40, solidly built, in a gray suit that didn't quite fit right in the shoulders, and he already had his phone raised, recording, his face set in an expression of grim, patient certainty, like a man who'd been waiting a long time for exactly this moment to arrive. "Who is that?" my mother said, her hand gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles had gone bloodless white. The man near the bar looked up. He looked straight past Brooke, straight past my mother, straight at Owen. "I'm Marcus Diallo," he said, loud, clear, cutting through the noise like something sharpened. "I'm Brooke's husband. We've been married for 3 years. She never told me she filed for divorce." For a moment, nobody in that room breathed. I felt Grant's hand find mine. "She never filed," Marcus said, taking one slow step forward, still recording, his voice absolutely level, the voice of a man who had rehearsed this in his car a dozen times, and finally gotten to say it out loud. "Which means whatever's happening here, with him," he pointed at Owen without even looking at him directly, like Owen wasn't worth the effort of a glance, "isn't a wedding anniversary. It's bigamy." My mother made a sound I'd never heard her make before, something between a gasp and a word that didn't finish forming. Somewhere near the back, I heard a chair scrape against the floor as somebody stood up too fast. Brooke didn't deny it. That was the thing that told me everything. She stood there in her champagne-colored dress with her hand pressed flat against her pregnant stomach, and she didn't say a single word, because there was nothing left to say that would put the last 3 minutes back in the box. I want to explain, slowly, how this had actually worked, because it took me weeks afterward, piecing it together from Marcus, from documents, from my mother's horrified reconstruction of a timeline she should have questioned years earlier, to understand the full shape of what my sister had built, and how close it had come to swallowing everyone in that room without anyone noticing until it was too late. Brooke had married Marcus Diallo quietly, at a courthouse in Little Rock 3 years earlier, the same year it turned out that she and Owen had first started exchanging the messages I'd found on his phone, the Cabo trip, the "wish I could be there with you." Marcus was a contractor, older than her by 6 years, steady, unglamorous, the kind of man who built decks and additions and didn't post about it. He wasn't part of her online life. He wasn't part of the influencer circuit or the gym crowd or any world our family orbited in. Brooke had kept him separate, deliberately, the way you keep 2 accounts at 2 different banks so no one statement tells the full story. She'd told Marcus she needed to keep the marriage quiet for brand reasons, that a public marriage would hurt her engagement numbers, that singleness was part of her monetization strategy, and incredibly, for 3 years, he'd gone along with it, because he loved her and because the arrangement, however strange, seemed to be working for both of them. What he hadn't known, what none of us had known, was that Brooke had been building a second parallel life on top of the first one, first as an affair with Owen, then as an entire second engagement, then as an entire second wedding, one he'd only discovered by accident 4 months earlier when a mutual acquaintance mentioned in passing, congratulating him on his wife's remarriage. Marcus had spent those 4 months quietly gathering proof instead of confronting her outright. Bank statements showing Brooke funneling money from a joint account with Owen into an account Marcus didn't know existed, Photographs from the actual wedding Brooke and Owen had held 18 months prior, a wedding my parents had attended and toasted at, a wedding I had, until that night, believed was real and legal and true. Marcus had a folder. He'd told me later he almost hadn't come to the anniversary party at all, that he'd debated for weeks whether confronting her privately was the more decent thing to do. But something in him, grief maybe, or a need to be believed by more than just himself, had needed witnesses. He'd needed a room full of people who would never again be able to pretend they hadn't heard it. The pieces fit together with an ugliness that still, months later, makes my stomach turn a little. Owen's fertility test, 8 months prior, must have landed on him like a bomb with a long fuse. He'd have known, sitting with those results, that any child Brooke had while they were together could not biologically be his. He had two choices in that moment: tell Brooke privately and quietly, and risk her leaving him the way I once had, for someone who could give her what she wanted, or say nothing, let the pregnancy proceed, and detonate the truth publicly at a moment of his own choosing, in front of the largest possible audience, in a way that positioned him as a wronged, honest man, rather than a liar who'd sat on the information for 8 months. He chose the second option. He'd been planning that toast in some form for months. He simply hadn't planned for Marcus Diallo to be standing near the bar with a phone already recording. Owen, for his part, stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom floor for what felt like a full minute after Marcus said the word bigamy, his mouth still slightly open from the sentence he'd never gotten to finish to me. I watched something collapse in his face. Not remorse, I don't think. Not exactly. But the specific horror of a man realizing every room he'd ever performed in was about to know the truth about him at the same time. That's not, he started. It's not what, Marcus said, still recording, still perfectly calm. Not true. I have the marriage license. I have the joint account statements. I have the photos from the wedding you two had at the Wildwood Inn 18 months ago. The one none of these people knew was illegal, because Brooke was still legally my wife the entire time. My mother sat down hard in her chair, like her legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold her. Carol, my father said quietly, using her name in that particular tone people use when a person needs to be brought back from somewhere far away. Did you know any of this? She shook her head, over and over, small, tight motions, and I believed her, actually, because my mother's loyalty to Brooke had always been blind, but I didn't think it had ever been complicit. She'd been fooled the same as the rest of us. She'd simply been fooled more happily. Owen turned to me one more time, and this is the part I want to be precise about, because it's the moment the whole story had actually been building toward without my realizing it. He looked at me the way a drowning man looks at the one person on the shore who might still throw a rope. Reagan, he said, please, you know me. Tell them I'm not, tell them this isn't who I am. I set my hand on my stomach, not out of instinct this time, but deliberately, so he'd have no way to misread what I was about to say. I don't know you, I said. I was married to you for 7 years, and I don't know you at all. I didn't know you were capable of loving my sister behind my back while I gave myself infertility treatments to have your child. I didn't know you'd let a woman carry a pregnancy for months while sitting on proof you couldn't have caused it, just so you could time the reveal for maximum damage. And I definitely didn't know until about 30 seconds ago that you'd been sleeping with a bigamist for 3 years and never noticed. Someone near the back of the room laughed. A single involuntary bark of a laugh quickly smothered, the sound of a person who couldn't help it even in the middle of a catastrophe. You want me to tell them this isn't who you are, I said. This is exactly who you are. It's who you've always been. I just used to be too tired and too in love to look at it directly. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Grant's hand tightened slightly around mine, not pulling me away, just letting me know he was there, steady, the way he always was. I lost our baby 3 weeks after you left, I said, and the room, if possible, went even quieter, because this was information nobody in that ballroom had ever heard. Not my mother, not my father, not Brooke, nobody. I never told you. I never told anyone. I didn't want your guilt, and I definitely didn't want hers. I nodded once toward Brooke without looking at her directly. I built an entire life you know nothing about, because you were never actually in it long enough to learn it. And now you're standing here in front of everyone who trusted you, hoping I'll rescue you from the mess you built with your own hands. I won't. I'm done rescuing you. I've been done for a long time. I turned and walked toward the exit with Grant beside me, and behind us, the ballroom finally broke into full chaos. My mother's voice rising, Brooke's sobbing, Marcus calmly informing anyone who'd listen that he had already retained an attorney and would be filing charges related to marriage fraud. The string quartet's cellist quietly packing up his instrument like a man who understood his services were no longer required for the evening. I didn't look back before we got to the car. I'd looked back at that particular door enough times in my life. I was done doing it. The days after the party moved fast and then slow in the way trauma always does, adrenaline giving way to a long, strange stillness. Marcus filed for annulment of his marriage to Brooke within the week, alleging fraud, and simultaneously reported the situation to the district attorney's office in Pulaski County, where bigamy remained a prosecutable offense, a Class D felony carrying up to 6 years, though in practice, his attorney told him, prosecutors rarely pursued jail time in cases without additional aggravating factors. Brooke wasn't looking at prison. She was looking at something in some ways worse for a woman who'd built her entire identity on being liked. Public, undeniable, unspinnable exposure. The video Marcus had recorded made its way, inevitably, onto the internet within 72 2 hours. Someone at the party, to this day I don't know who, though I have my suspicions about a cousin of Owen's who'd never liked Brooke, leaked a clip of the toast, the confession, the word bigamy landing in that stunned room, to a gossip account with 800,000 followers. It was reposted, stitched, reacted to, dissected by strangers who had never met any of us, for the better part of 2 weeks. Brooke's own account, the one with the ring light and the fake tan and the 11,000 followers that had somehow grown to 60,000 over the years I'd stopped checking, lost 18,000 followers in 4 days, and gained a comment section she eventually had to disable entirely. My mother sided with Brooke at first, out of the pure gravitational habit of a lifetime spent doing exactly that. She called Brooke daily. She told my father that Brooke was manipulated by Owen, really, if you think about it. A sentence that made my father, for the first time in my adult life, actually raise his voice at her. She married 2 men at once, Carol, he said, loud enough that I heard it secondhand from him directly, since he called to tell me about it, something he'd never done before in his life. Nobody manipulated her into a courthouse in Little Rock 3 years ago. My father, it turned out, was the unexpected ally none of us saw coming. Vernon Castellano, no relation to Owen despite the coincidence of surnames that had briefly confused half the wedding guests years earlier, had spent 38 years as a claims adjuster, a man trained by profession to notice inconsistencies in stories, a skill he'd apparently never applied to his own family until it exploded in a ballroom in front of him. He called me 2 weeks after the party and said simply, "I should have looked closer a long time ago. I'm sorry I didn't." It wasn't a grand gesture. It didn't erase years of watching Brooke get the softer treatment, but it was real, and it was the first time in longer than I could remember that a member of my own family had chosen accuracy over comfort where I was concerned. He did more than apologize in the weeks that followed. He drove out to my gym unannounced one Sunday, sat in my office while I did payroll, and asked carefully, like a man approaching a subject he didn't fully know how to hold, whether there was anything from before his word, meaning before Grant, before the gym, before any of it, that he should have asked me about years earlier and hadn't. I told him about the loans I'd paid off, the $34,000, the exact number, because by then I'd stopped rounding things down to make them sound smaller and more palatable. I told him about the fertility bills. I didn't tell him about the baby I'd lost. Some things I still wasn't ready to hand to anyone, even him. He sat with the numbers I did share for a long moment, doing the kind of silent math men his age do when they're recalculating a whole decade of assumptions. And then he said, "Your mother and I should have paid more attention to what you were carrying instead of what Brooke was performing." I've thought about that sentence more than almost anything else anyone said to me that year. My mother took longer. She spent the first month after the party defending Brooke reflexively, out of the same lifelong habit that had made her celebrate Owen's affair on the phone the day after he left me. But even my mother couldn't fully outrun what came next. The annulment filings became public record, and a woman from her church group of all people mentioned to her over coffee that she'd read about it online, watched the video. "Couldn't believe it, Carol, just couldn't believe your family went through all that." My mother called me that same evening, quieter than I'd heard her in years, and asked if she could come see the gym. I said yes. She stood in the lobby for a long time looking at the equipment, at the framed photo Ilsa had put up of my first day mopping floors next to a photo of the ribbon cutting, and she said, "I don't think I ever really looked at what you built. I was always looking at Brooke instead, even when I was supposedly looking at you." I didn't forgive her in that moment, not completely, not in the tidy way stories sometimes want you to, but I let her stand there. I let her look. It was a start, and starts are usually all any of us get. Owen's parents, Diane and Roy, reached out separately, almost a month after the party, mortified in a way that had nothing performative about it. Diane sent a handwritten letter, an actual letter, 3 pages, mailed to the gym because she didn't have my new address, apologizing for a son she said she'd raised better than this, though she also admitted with a candor I hadn't expected that she'd noticed the way Owen looked at Brooke at family gatherings years before any of it became public and had said nothing, because saying something felt like accusing her own son of a thing she hoped wasn't true. "I chose comfort over honesty," she wrote, "and I think that's exactly what he learned to do too." I kept that letter. I still have it in a drawer at home, a different drawer than the one I used to keep in my head, one that holds things worth remembering instead of things I was trying to survive. Owen made his own desperate final moves in those weeks, each one worse than the last. He showed up at my gym on a Thursday evening, waiting in the parking lot until close, and asked me, standing beside my car under a security light, to just talk for old time's sake. I told him no. He came back 4 days later with flowers, a gesture so disconnected from what he'd actually done that I nearly laughed in his face. Grant wasn't with me that time, and Owen must have read the absence as opportunity, because he grabbed my wrist as I turned to walk away. Not hard, but enough. Enough that Ilsa, closing up inside, saw it through the front window and came out with a phone already in her hand. "Let go of her," Ilsa said, in the voice I imagined she'd once used on a powerlifting platform in front of judges and a crowd. "Or I'm calling the police right now, and then I'm calling every member of this gym and telling them exactly why." Owen let go. He didn't come back after that, though he tried one more approach 2 weeks later, through my mother, asking her to pass along a message that he'd changed and wanted one real conversation, no pressure. My mother, to her credit, in one of the earliest signs that something in her was shifting, told him she wasn't going to be his messenger anymore, and that if he had something to say to me, he could say it himself or not say it at all. He didn't say it at all. He lost his job 3 weeks later, not because of the scandal directly, his employer told him, but because a company culture built on trust didn't align well with a viral video of him publicly humiliating 2 women at once. It was corporate language for a decision that had everything to do with reputation and nothing to do with performance reviews. And Owen, for the first time in his life, had no one left to blame the outcome on but himself. He tried freelance logistics consulting for a few months after that, work he'd apparently talked about doing, eventually, for years without ever starting, and it didn't go well. 2 clients he told my father about, in one of the strange, halting conversations that happened between the 2 of them in the aftermath, dropped him within the first month over missed deadlines. He moved out of the house he and Brooke had shared, the one that no longer legally belonged to either of them as a couple, into a 1-bedroom apartment on the west side, the kind of place with popcorn ceilings and a parking lot that flooded every time it rained hard, the kind of place I remembered us joking about avoiding back when we were newly married and optimistic about where we were headed. I heard about the apartment from my father, who'd driven Owen's things over in his truck one Saturday out of what he described to me, almost apologetically, as just wanting to see for myself how bad it had gotten. He said Owen cried in the cab of the truck on the drive over, not dramatically, just quietly, staring out the window, and said at one point, "I keep trying to figure out the moment I actually lost everything, and I can't find it. It doesn't feel like one moment. It feels like I threw it all away one small decision at a time and just didn't notice until it was gone." My father told me that sentence like he thought it might comfort me, some kind of proof that Owen understood what he'd done. It didn't comfort me. It just confirmed something I'd already suspected, that Owen had always understood exactly what he was doing, every step of the way, and the tragedy he was mourning wasn't the harm he'd caused. It was that the harm had finally caught up with the person who caused it. I had a quiet moment, in the middle of all that chaos, that I want to tell you about honestly, because it's the part of this story that isn't triumphant, the part that still catches me sometimes on ordinary evenings. I sat on the floor of my gym office one night, alone, after everyone had gone home, and I let myself grieve the marriage I'd thought I was in for those 7 years. Not the man Owen turned out to be, but the man I'd believed he was, the one who worked late because he cared about providing, the one whose silences I'd read as depth instead of absence. That man never existed, but I'd loved him for years, and grief doesn't check your facts before it arrives. I cried for probably 20 minutes, not for Owen, not really, but for the version of my 20s I'd spent building a life with someone who was never fully present in it, for the baby I still hadn't told a single living soul about except, now, however incidentally, an entire ballroom of near strangers. Some losses don't get smaller just because you've moved on from the person who caused them. They just get quieter. Legal complications kept unspooling for months. Owen and Brooke's actual marriage, the ceremony at the Wildwood Inn 18 months earlier, was void from the start under Arkansas law, since Brooke was still legally married to Marcus at the time, which meant the property they'd bought together as a married couple, a modest 3-bedroom on the north side, had to be untangled through the courts as unmarried co-owners instead, a process that dragged on for nearly 8 months and cost both of them a combined $22,000 in legal fees neither of them, it turned out, could comfortably afford anymore, given that Owen was unemployed, and Brooke's brand deals had evaporated along with her follower count. The house itself became its own small war. Owen had put down $31,000 from a savings account he'd built partly during our marriage, money I recognized immediately when the figure came up secondhand through my father, because it was close enough to the amount I'd once helped him save by working those steakhouse shifts that I couldn't unsee the math. Brooke had put in less upfront, but had made most of the mortgage payments during their time together, using money her attorney later argued came substantially from Marcus's contracting income, funneled through the account Marcus hadn't known she was maintaining, untangling whose dollars belonged to whom, across 3 overlapping relationships and 2 marriages, one of them fraudulent, took a forensic accountant nearly 4 months to sort out to the court's satisfaction. In the end, the house was sold at a loss, split according to a formula none of the 3 of them fully agreed with, and none of them walked away with enough to call it a fresh start. Marcus, for his part, didn't pursue criminal charges to their fullest extent once the annulment was finalized, though he did press forward long enough to force a plea agreement that kept Brooke's bigamy charge on record even without jail time attached, a fact she'd have to disclose on certain background checks for years afterward, including, as it turned out, the background check required for a fitness influencer partnership deal she tried to salvage 6 months later, one that fell through the moment the brand's legal team ran her name. He moved to Memphis within the year, took a job foreman position with a commercial contracting firm, and married again 18 months after the annulment, a woman named Priya who worked in hospital administration and who Marcus told my father in one of the strange threads of contact that connected all of our lives in the aftermath actually tells me the truth, which turns out to matter more than I ever gave it credit for. Brooke's engagement empire, the whole curated architecture of her online life, didn't survive the exposure. The brand deals she'd built her income around, a protein powder company, a activewear line, a meal prep subscription service, all quietly ended their partnerships within 2 months, citing standard morality clause language in the fine print none of us had ever thought to read closely before. She moved back in with our parents for a period, a fact my mother mentioned to me once, quietly, almost like a confession, as though even she understood how far this was from where any of us had expected Brooke's life life to land. Brooke's baby was born that autumn, a girl, and DNA testing, requested by Owen's attorney, ostensibly to settle questions of financial responsibility that had become relevant once his job loss made every dollar a fight, confirmed what he'd apparently suspected all along. He wasn't the father. Marcus wasn't either, as it turned out, since he and Brooke hadn't been intimate in over a year by the time she conceived. The child's biological father was a personal trainer Brooke had been seeing on the side of the side, a fact that came out through the same DNA proceeding and finished off whatever fragments of Brooke's public reputation remained. I heard all of this secondhand, through my father mostly, occasionally through my mother in the rare moments she called me instead of Brooke. I didn't reach out to either of them directly. I didn't need to see it unfold up close. I had my own life to build, and by then it had grown large enough that I mostly didn't have room left over for theirs. My daughter Wren was born the following February, 6 weeks after Grant and I married in a small courthouse ceremony neither of us wanted to turn into a production. 19 guests. My father walked me in. My mother came, quiet and diminished in a way I'd never seen her, and hugged me longer than she ever had before, and said, "I'm sorry I laughed on the phone that day. I've thought about it more than you probably know. It wasn't everything. It was something. I run a gym now with 400 members and 3 additional trainers on staff. One of them a woman I met the same way Ilsa met me, struggling, uncertain, cleaning floors to make rent, until I saw something in her worth investing in the way Ilsa once invested in me. Her name is Delphine. She was 26 when she started, fleeing a marriage of her own, and I paid for her certification the same way Ilsa paid for mine. No strings, no interest, because that's the only kind of debt worth passing forward. Ilsa still comes in twice a week, technically retired, unable to fully let go of a place she loves. She met Wren at 11 days old and told her, dead serious, "Honey, a barbell fixes more than you think." The exact words she'd once said to me, and I laughed until I cried, because some things really do come back around whole. Paulette still trains with me every Tuesday and Thursday, 60 now, stronger than most women half her age, and she likes to remind people whenever the topic of the gym's early days comes up that she saw it coming before anybody else did, which isn't entirely true, but which I let her have anyway, because she earned the right to a little embellishment. Desmond still owns the building. I pay him full market rent now, have for years, at my own insistence, because charity was never something I wanted to still be leaning on once I no longer needed it. Grant coaches part-time still, mostly younger lifters with Olympic ambitions of their own, and spends most weekday afternoons with Wren while I run the business side of things. A division of labor neither of us planned, but that fits the shape of both our lives better than anything we could have designed on paper. Wren is 2.5 now, loud, opinionated, obsessed with the resistance bands she's not supposed to play with already, according to Ilsa. Built like she's got good hips for a deadlift someday. A joke that makes Grant laugh every single time, no matter how many times Ilsa repeats it. Owen reached out once more, about 4 months ago. A text I didn't answer. Something short about hoping I was doing well. Something that read less like an apology and more like a man checking whether the door was still fully closed. It was. I didn't respond, and I haven't heard from him since. Brooke and I haven't spoken since that ballroom. I think about her sometimes, not with the hatred I might have expected of myself years ago, but with something closer to a distant, tired sadness. For the sister she could have been if she'd ever once believed there was enough room in our family for both of us to be loved without one of us having to lose something first. I don't know if she believes that now. I don't know if she ever will. Here's the truth I keep coming back to. The one this whole story was really about underneath the ballroom and the bigamy and the viral video. I told Owen to go have my sister, and I never told him about the baby, because in that moment, standing in our kitchen with a dish towel in my hand, I understood something I couldn't have explained out loud yet. He didn't deserve to know. Not because I wanted to punish him, though maybe some small part of me did, but because that piece of information was mine, was ours, mine and the child's, and I was done handing him things that belonged to me just because he'd once had the right to ask for them. I built an entire life out of a moment he thought was an ending. He looked me dead in the eyes and said he couldn't keep lying to himself, that my sister was the one he really wanted, and I let him walk toward what he wanted without ever telling him what he was actually leaving behind. I've replayed that kitchen 100 times since, the dish towel still damp in my hand, the trash bin waiting by the door, and I've never once wished I'd said more to him that night. Silence was the only leverage I had left, and I spent it exactly where it counted. He spent the next 1.5 years believing he'd traded up. He hadn't. He'd simply traded one truth he couldn't handle for another one he handled even worse. And in the space between those two truths, I quietly built something he never saw coming, and could never have built himself. I still think about that first version of the baby I lost sometimes. On quiet nights when Wren is finally asleep, and the gym has gone dark for the night, and it's just me and Grant, and the particular silence of a life that finally feels like it belongs to me. I keep a small, unremarkable thing from that time in a box in our closet, a receipt from the pharmacy where I filled the prenatal vitamins I never got to finish taking, dated the week before I lost her. I don't look at it often. I don't need to. Knowing it's there is enough. The same way some griefs don't need daily attention to remain honored. I don't think grief and gratitude cancel each other out. I think you can hold both at once, the loss and the life that came after it, without one erasing the other. Something real was taken from me in that first pregnancy, something I never got to explain to anyone, something I'm only saying out loud now, to you, for the first time in any real way. But something real was also built. built, slowly, out of a gym floor and a barbell and people who believed in me before I fully believed in myself. Owen looked me dead in the eyes and told me who he really wanted. I looked right back and told him to go have her. I never told him what I was carrying. And in the end, the thing I was carrying, that child, that silence, that refusal to hand him one more piece of myself, turned out to be the exact thing that let me walk out of that kitchen and build a life he was never invited back into. That's the whole truth of it. I don't need him to understand what he lost. I understand it. That's always been enough.